welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm going to keep the webinar short and simple. So I'm just going to give you an overview about the benefit system. I'll be happy to take any questions while I'm speaking, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity later on as well to ask any questions. You have joined the session today because you found, it's, most people find the benefit system quite complex, and, it's not easy to navigate. And, so you've come to the right place, so I'll try to make sure that I, simplify the system, how it works, so that it would be then easier for you to know whether that is something which you can go ahead with and think about applying for different benefits. Now, with the benefits system, how it works is that usually it looks into what income or savings you may have, or how your condition is affecting you, or in certain circumstances it does not even look at what income or savings you may have for you to apply for certain benefits. So it's not linked specifically to a certain condition, but it's more about how that condition is affecting you for certain benefits. And generally speaking, people think of benefits as they only depend on what income or savings one may have. That is true to a certain extent, but not all benefits depend on what income or savings you may have. So I think that's important distinction to make, so that even if you think, okay, my savings may be quite substantial for me not to be eligible for benefits, you may not be eligible for benefits which take into account income or savings, but you may still be eligible for other benefits which may be out there. So that's why it's always worth exploring with the benefits advisor, but according to your own circumstances, whether which benefits you may be eligible for. So like in terms of income related benefits, the most common one is the universal credit. It's a new benefit. Well, I say it's a new benefit, it's been there for a while, but it's still being rolled out. What they did with universal credit was they rolled 6 benefits into one, and the idea behind that was that instead of applying to 3 different places, you can just apply for universal credit to get any of those 6 benefits which you may be eligible for. So for instance, if somebody is not well, usually there's a benefit called employment and support allowance, which would apply to your situation, and that's for adults. It can depend on what income or savings you may have, but even if your income and savings are high enough, you may be eligible for the sickness-related benefit, which is the employment support allowance based on your national insurance contributions for the past few years. The other benefit which may be relevant would be for benefits like housing benefits, so help with your rent, and child tax credit or working tax credits. So the 3 examples which I've given you previously, prior to universal credit, if somebody needed to apply for employment and support allowance, they would contact the Job Centre Plus. If somebody needed to apply for help with the rent or housing benefit, they would contact their local council. If somebody needed to apply for child tax credit or working tax credit, they would contact their HMRC. So the idea behind rolling the 6 benefits into one was that people just apply for universal credit, and if they are eligible for any of these benefits, instead of contacting 3 different organizations, they can just contact one, and if they're eligible, then they would be able to get, any of these benefits, depending on their circumstances and what they would be eligible for. But universal credit is not the only means tested benefit or benefits which depend on income or savings. People may also be eligible for council tax support through their local council. It's means tested. It would depend on what income or savings you may have. Council tax has been localized. So your local council would have their, to a certain extent, their own rules in terms of what savings you may need to have before you qualify. Besides, the means tested benefits, the other major benefit which would apply to anyone who is off sick potentially would be disability living allowance for children. So anyone under 16 may qualify for disability living allowance. Anyone 16 or over may be eligible for what is called personal independence payment. Now, with both DLA and personal independence payment, they don't take into account what income or savings you may have or what national insurance contributions you would have paid. The only thing which is relevant is that how your illness is affecting you. So as you're aware that, two people having the same illness, the way it affects them can be totally different. So that's what's really important when the eligibility criteria applies for either disability living allowance or personal independence payment, that how the illness is affecting someone. And they take into account certain activities that, how you're able to perform those activities. Even if you're able to do those activities yourself, if the difficulty is there, and if you need prompting, for instance, somebody is living on their own, there's nobody there to prompt them. But if the prompting is needed, that may still be enough. So what I'm trying to say is that, it's because with disability living allowance or personal independence payment, the first thing which people may think is that, I may need to have a carer. If I've got a carer, then it's very likely that I'll qualify for these benefits. But that's not necessarily the case. Obviously, if you've got a carer, you've got a stronger case. But even if you don't have a carer, if you're managing things on your own, but you're finding it difficult to do, you may still be eligible, because the underlying thing which they look at is if the need is there. Even if you're managing it on your own, but you're finding it difficult to do that, that shows that you've got a need. And if you've got those needs for those different activities, then that's what they're going to look at. I'm not going deeply into the different activities the DLA or the disability living allowance or the personal independence payment may have. AAT has got a really good information on their website on the benefits which are available, and one of the leaflets also have got further details about the different benefits available, like disability living allowance and the personal independence payment and the employment and support allowance. So besides that, one of the other questions which are usually asked is, can we get any help with travel to hospital, or with our prescriptions, or with the dental treatment? So again, it depends on your circumstances. So again, help with the pre-prescriptions or help with the travel costs, usually they come under what is called help with health costs. So pre-prescriptions and travel costs are usually you would be eligible for if you're on certain benefits. So like if you would be on universal credit, there is a specific criteria under universal credit. If you satisfy that criteria, then you would be eligible, because help with health costs are means tested. So if somebody is already on a means tested benefit, then it becomes easier for them to qualify for that help. If you're not, if you're not on certain benefits, if you've spoken to a benefits advisor and you're still not eligible for any benefits, that does not necessarily mean that you won't be eligible for any help with the free prescriptions or with the travel costs, because there is another scheme which is called the low income scheme. So, and it's got its own criteria. So even if you're not eligible for a certain benefit, the low income scheme for help with the free prescriptions or with the travel cost to hospital has got a separate criteria. So separate criteria. So it's still looking into it, whether that is something which you may qualify for. I'm going to share a link about the help with the health cost scheme, which you may find useful in terms of knowing the eligibility criteria. The AT website has got those details, but there is on one of the websites which runs the scheme for the help with the health costs, you can check within 3 minutes whether you would be eligible for or not. They've got a quick criteria. They've got some quick questions, brief questions to ask you, and once you answer those, they generally speaking, they can tell you if it's worth applying, if it's worth moving forward to apply for the help with health costs, which you may find useful to do, and they've got the criteria there as well, which would help you as well. There are certain conditions as well, which may make you eligible for help with the pre-prescriptions. So again, going through the criteria, they will ask you that there are certain conditions which you may have, and accordingly then they would be able to tell you if that would make you eligible for help with the pre-prescriptions or other help. Obviously I'm afraid not all health conditions qualify, but there are certain health conditions which may qualify. So once you are answering that once you're going through that eligibility checklist, and once you answer that, then they would be able to let you know if that is something which you may qualify for. How are we doing for time, Sam? So I think it's about 15 minutes in.
That's correct, Atif. We're absolutely fine.
Okay. And in terms of the link which I discussed about, do you want me to share that in the chat now or forward it to you later for you to circulate?
Yes, if you could forward it on to me, Atif, I can certainly send a mass email out to everybody that's attended tomorrow.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's fine to me. Okay. Yeah, I'll be happy to answer any questions, any specific questions which you may have, because usually people find it easy to know that what they may or may not be eligible for to apply for in their own circumstances. I won't be able to advise you individually on your circumstances, but I can give you a general overview as it whether it's worth it for you to move forward and think about applying for certain benefits. Absolutely. Great question, because PIP is one of those benefits which is very technical to complete, because they are asking for certain specific information. And, as I was in my talk, as I was saying earlier, it depends on the needs, what the needs are. So I think the way you are answering the question is really important, because people may be eligible for the benefit, but the way they are answering it, they may not be answering in a way that would satisfy the criteria. So a benefits advisor would just make sure that they're asking the questions and then putting the information correctly on the benefit form itself. So this goes true for both the personal independence payment, PIP, or the disability living allowance for children. So yeah, so I think that is usually a really good start to have some help in terms of where you can get the help. Citizens Advice Bureau usually is the first port of call. Now, again, all Citizens Advice Bureau work differently. Sometimes they do have specific volunteers who help people complete the forms. So it's worth checking with them, if that's a service which is available with them. Usually they do. Usually they would be able to help people complete the forms. There is another good website which actually lists. So if you put in your postcode, it will tell you what organizations are there in your area, whom you can get help with. So Sam, I can forward that link to you as well, so that if you want to share that with people widely, because sometimes it's easier for you, because obviously, different services available in different area. If you know what services are available within your area, it gets much easier then for you to contact them to find out, what services are available and how they can help. So that's the first stage normally. With PAPE, coming back to your question, with PAPE, yeah, that's a good start to have some help. And usually, people are eligible. If they are eligible, then they're likely to get the benefit. But in some circumstances, even if you're not eligible, it's still worth appealing. Usually there's a stage before appealing. You ask for a reconsideration, and then after reconsideration there is an appeal. So till it goes to the tribunal, the decision making is within the Department for Work and Pensions. But once it goes to an appeal to a tribunal is an independent body. So usually people find that they're able to get a successful outcome at the tribunal. In fact, the success rate, the last time I checked for benefits, including the personal independence payment, was about 70% at the tribunal. So usually it's still worth it. I know it can be stressful and time consuming, but if answering question, if they're really unwell and they think they're eligible, then I think exhausting your options till tribunal stage is maybe worth it, because as the success rate is really high at the tribunal, then you are likely to get a successful outcome. So when they ask you to return the form within a specific date, the reason for that is that when you request the form over the telephone, they date stamp it from the date when you request it, and they give you about 4 to 6 weeks to complete and return the form. So if you complete it within that time, then and if you're successful in your claim, then the claim date would be the date of your telephone call. But if for some reason you missed the deadline, it's still worth sending in the form if you've already completed it and it's ready to go. The only difference would be that they would, if you're awarded, then if you're awarded the benefit, the DLA, then the start date would be the date when they receive the form. So I wouldn't delay. It doesn't mean that you won't be eligible or they won't entertain your form. It's just that the start date of your claim, if you're successful, would be the date when they receive the form. If you think that you still need a little bit of more time to complete the form, you can always request a new form, because that would mean that when you contact them again, that would be the start date of your claim, and then if you're successful, it would start from the date of your second telephone call. So I would still recommend, if everything is ready and completed for your form, then it's worth sending it straight away. If not, if you think it may still take a few days or a week or so, then it's worth requesting another form so that you can protect, the days or the weeks for your claim, because and as long as you send the form within the requested time frame the second time around, they should start it. So like if you request the form today, again, the claim date would be from today if you send it within the time they're asking you to send it or return them to. So either way, it would be fine. If you complete the form, you can send it straight away. If you need a little bit more time, just request another form. Again, without being privy to the circumstances, I wouldn't be able to advise for sure whether they are eligible or not. But as I was discussing earlier, when you appeal, the DWP can refuse it, but then what they do is they send it to the tribunal. So I'm not sure when they say it was turned down at appeal, whether it was turned down by the tribunal or just by the DWP. If it was only turned down by the DWP and then it's gone on to the tribunal, it's still worth going ahead and attending the tribunal appeal, because the chances of success are much higher at the tribunal stage. Now, in terms of if a health professional is telling someone that they would be 100% eligible for a benefit, I'm not saying it would apply in this situation, but because the criteria is legal rather than medical, so if a health professional is saying somebody would be eligible 100%, I would take that as a caution, because until unless they are advising that medically, legally, I doubt they would be able to say that, because they won't be privy to the legal criteria. Again, caveating that I'm not saying that this apply to this situation, but usually if a medical professional is saying that that somebody is 100% likely to be eligible, usually that would be the case when they are medically advising, when you can apply for DLA or the personal independence payment if somebody is in advanced stage of their illness. So that's a different criteria, and that's where I wouldn't, because even when I used to advise people, because if somebody is in advanced stage, it's only a medical professional criteria. It's only the medical professional's opinion that would matter, not mine. I wouldn't be able to advise them legally. It's their opinion whether somebody's illness is in advanced stage for them to qualify under that route. But if it's a normal route, then it would be the legal criteria, and then only I will be able to advise whether somebody would be eligible or not. So I think we're talking about two different things, and it depends on their situation and circumstances. But certainly, if the appeal has not been heard by the tribunal, I would certainly advise to go ahead and attend the tribunal hearing. And if you've got help available in your local area, if an organization can help you, sometimes there are organizations in the local area who can actually help you represent you at the tribunal stage. Yes. So when you work, depending on how much you're earning, when you get your payslip, the payslip will tell you if you have paid national insurance contributions. Yeah. It doesn't matter as long as you have paid something, that's enough. It doesn't mean that how much you have paid. As long as you have paid the national insurance contributions, that should be enough. And usually there is a threshold. So if you're earning a certain amount, and then you're likely to have paid that, so that should be enough. Again, this is slightly complicated, so that's why it's always worth checking with a benefits advisor about the national insurance contributions. But it's very easy for you to know whether you paid them or not. So if you paid them, if they have been on your pay slips, usually they look into only for the past few years. So like For state pension, they look at it on a longer period because that's related to your state pension. But for the employment and support allowance, they only look at it for the past few years, rather than, so if somebody has not worked for 5 years, but they have worked for 20 years before then, I'm afraid they won't be eligible, because they would only look at the past few years of your national insurance contributions. So if you're off sick and you've exhausted your statutory sick pay, so statutory sick pay usually lasts for 28 weeks, but they allow you to apply for employment support allowance 3 months in advance.
Okay.
So like if somebody's they've just started their statutory sick pay and it would finish in 28 weeks. They would allow someone to apply if they're likely to be off sick after the 28 weeks of statutory sick pay. So they would, the DWP would allow someone to apply for the contributory or what is called new style employment support allowance 3 months in advance from the statutory sick pay ending. So in about 3 months time from now, they should be able to apply. So, or rather, shall I say 3 months before this 28 weeks allow. It can be so difficult, and the process can sometimes be, not easy, and people may find it difficult. And normally when we think about, how we go about our lives, we think positively. Yes, we can do things, and we can do stuff. But the way usually the personal independence payment or the employment support allowance, the way they ask questions is what you cannot do, and it's very difficult. When you're trying to stay positive and trying to do things, and then it's not easy for you to answer. To think that way. But I'm afraid, like the personal independence payment, employment support allowance has got their own, has got its own criteria as well in terms of the medical side of things. They don't call it medical. It's more about functional assessment. How do you function day to day? So there would be that element. But in your situation, the other question would be that if you think that your income or savings would be high enough for you to go through the income related route for employment support allowance, but if you think that you may qualify through your national insurance contributions, even though with the national insurance contributions, they don't take into account income or savings, but the only thing which they would take into account would be a pension as well. But again, it's got a set criteria in terms of how they look into it. So again, it would be worth speaking with a benefits advisor just to check, whether that is something which you may find easy enough to go through, or because the thing is, with the benefits advisor, you've got the support available, so they would be able to do most of the work for you. They would be able to look into whether you'd be eligible. They would be able to advise you, give you your options. And once they've given you your options, then you can decide, what's the best route for you, whether you want to apply, whether you don't want to apply, whether you're eligible, whether you're not eligible. In terms of pension credit, it usually means tested. So it would look into what income or savings you may have. But the savings threshold is much more relaxed for pension credit rather than for people for working age. So
is that the pension credit from the ESA? Because from what I've gathered, that you can get like the support group, the working group, and then you can just have the basic credits towards your pension.
Yes. So for the employment and support allowance, that's for working age people. Pension credit is for pension age people.
Yeah.
So if somebody is, so you would be eligible for either or. So if someone is of working age, they're likely to be eligible for employment and support allowance rather than pension credit. If they are a pension credit, then it's the pension. If they are a pension age, then it's the pension credit which they need to apply for rather than employment and support allowance, because employment support allowance is only for people of working age. But you're right, with the employment and support allowance, you also get credited with national insurance contributions, which in turn would help if you don't have the full qualifying years to qualify for state pension. And in certain situations, you may, some people may just want to get the national insurance credits. As long as they satisfy the functional test, even they don't qualify through the route of national insurance contributions or because their income or savings are very high, as long as they satisfy the functional test, they may still get credits towards, through the employment support allowance towards their state pension. So that is something, again, a benefits advisor would be able to talk you through and advise you in your circumstances what would be the best option. Because for some people, they were already worked throughout their life. They would have already completed, you know, all the years for their state pension. So it may actually not apply to them just to actually go for the employment support allowance just for the credits. But again, you know, a benefits advisor would be able to advise you according to your circumstances, and then tell you, you know, what would be the best course of action. Yes, so if your question is geared towards that, when he is an adult, what benefits he is likely to be eligible for, yeah, you're quite right. The question would be then as to what his circumstances are and what he's likely to be eligible for at that time. So, like, for instance, if he is still off sick and cannot work, then employment and support allowance would be the route in. Now, when I talk about employment and support allowance, on its own, I mean the one based on his national insurance contributions, but that's unlikely to apply because he wouldn't have a working life. But in his case, it would be universal credit, because universal credit, within universal credit, one of the benefits is income-related employment and support allowance. So that's what is likely to apply in his situation. Because if he is not able to work because of his illness, then that's the one which he is likely to qualify for. So once he's an adult, then you can start the process, and then, you know, they would look into his circumstances, and then they will let him know if that is something which he would be eligible for or not. At the moment, if he's 10 years old, the only benefit which apply to children, I'm afraid, is the disability living allowance for children. And if somebody is looking after someone who is on disability living allowance or personal independence payment, as long as they don't work full time, then they may be eligible for carers allowance. But once he's an adult, there would be a range of benefits which he may be eligible for depending on his circumstances.
Yeah, I think it was more whether I need to register him for disability living allowance at the moment whilst he's a child, to make it, to kind of evidence that he's needed it whilst he's been a child, or is that not how it works?
No, it doesn't work that way. So whichever benefit you would be applied, whichever benefit he would be eligible for once he becomes an adult, they would. So, like, for example, which I gave earlier about universal credit. So they won't look into whether he was eligible for disability living allowance when he was 10, or, you know, even before he turned, even before he became an adult, because universal credit has got its own criteria. So they would look into that criteria rather than what benefits he was eligible prior to that, because disability living allowance has got a completely different criteria to what universal credit criteria is. So yeah, so so coming back to your question, yeah, you know, when he becomes an adult, that would be the time to think about what benefits he would be eligible for then. He doesn't need to be in. So if somebody hasn't claimed any benefit before they become adult, once they become an adult, and if they satisfy the criteria for the relevant benefit, they would be eligible for it, irrespective of whether they were in the system previously or not, whether they were claiming any benefits or not. That would all be irrelevant. as long as when they are adult and they satisfy the criteria for that benefit which they are applying for. How the carers allowance work is that they expect you to be looking after someone full time. So you can work part-time and then claim carers allowance, but if you're working full-time, then it's, you know, it's just not possible for you to do, you can't do 2 jobs at the same time as full-time, you know. So that's how they look at it. So they've got a certain set criteria in terms of how many number of hours you can work and claim carers allowance and what income you may need to have to be eligible for both the carers allowance as well as you know, what you're earning. So as long as it's not full-time work and you're within the threshold, what number of hours you're working and what you're earning, then you can be eligible for both. Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
That's what I didn't want.
Absolutely not. It's only if you qualify for the benefit, and then depending on, you remember, I think you mentioned that they've got different groups, like whether you're placed in the support group or the work-related activity group. For people who are placed in the support group, usually they're not supposed to look for work. So if someone applies for employment support allowance and is placed in the support group, they're not asked to look for work then. So only if you're in the work-related activity group of the employment and support allowance, then you know, they would support you to look for or to find work. So if somebody is terminally ill, if somebody is a child, then it's usually the disability living allowance, which they may qualify for. It's usually the care component. So disability living allowance has got 2 components: one is care, one is mobility. And they've got certain criteria, so I'm not going to go into detail, but usually their care component usually applies. So what as I touched upon earlier, a health professional, in their opinion, if they think that the criteria apply for someone, what we call special rules for terminally ill people, if they complete a form saying that, yes, they think a health professional completes a form. Health professional could be a hospital consultant, it could be a GP, it could be a nurse. If they think that applies, they would normally complete a form, which is called a DS-1500 report. Once they complete that report, then someone can claim disability living allowance in the special rules for the care component. Equally, if they are an adult, then they can claim personal independence payment, daily living component under special rules. And if somebody is an adult, as opposed to a child, then you'll only be eligible for disability living allowance in the special rules. As an adult, you're likely to be eligible for personal independence payment just on the basis of the report, the DS-1500 report on special rules. But you may still qualify for employment support allowance as well as an adult. It would depend with the employment support allowance. If you're claiming on the basis of your national insurance contributions, if you've paid your contributions for the past few years, that's something which they would also look into. Or if someone wants to apply on the basis of their income or savings, then they can apply for universal credit in the special rules. And then the income related employment support allowance, which is part of the universal credit, they may also qualify for that. Usually when we talk about special rules for terminally ill people and the DS-1500 report, because the disability living allowance and the personal independence payment does not look into what contributions you have paid or what income or savings you may have, you usually qualify for the benefit. But additionally, for an adult, they may also qualify for employment support allowance if they additionally satisfy the criteria, for instance, for the new style employment support allowance in terms of the national insurance contributions for the past few years, or the income-related employment support allowance, which is within the universal credit system, if they satisfy the criteria for the income and savings as well.